everyone. Thank you for joining us with Literary Nights with Unsolicited Press. Before we begin, I want to make sure you smash the like button and subscribe and hit the bell so that you can get notifications of our next or all of our readings. We have some really interesting readers every other week, and this week we're going to be meeting Douglas Cole, Emily Kiernan, and Laurie Woodford. Douglas Cole's book is titled The Gold Tooth and the Crooked Smile of God. Now, isn't that an exciting title? It's poetry of street observations and what it means to be alive. Emily is the author of The Great Divide, which is a novel, and many other short fictions. She's the prose editor at Naomi Press and fiction editor at Rivet Journal, and she is a Pittsburgh native where she lives with her pup. And also, we want to welcome back Laurie Woodford, whose travel memoir, Unsettled, is basically about a woman trying to find her way. So, welcome to our wonderful authors. Welcome, Emily, Doug, and Laura. And we are looking forward to hearing your readings and to have a small literary discussion following. As usual, we're going to go in alphabetical order. So, Doug, that means you are first.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, Rosalia. And it's wonderful to be out here and represent Unsolicited Press. I love the press. I mentioned it to somebody. I said it's like the hottest press on the West Coast, I think. Anyway, they published my book, The Gold Tooth and the Crooked Smile of God. And side note is my son did the paintings for these pictures. But anyway, I have another book with them coming out this year called The Cabin at the End of the World. We'll see what that cover looks like soon. Anyway, this book, Gold Tooth, has a lot of sonnets in it, but they're kind of hidden. But I put one in plain sight as the first poem in the collection, as almost, and it's the most formal of them. Just to kind of, it's kind of a trick because then it gets really loose later as it goes on. Anyway, and the poem is called Mind Moon. That's hyphenated. And there's a brief quotation at the beginning. Sometimes the master is more poetic and compares the mind of emptiness to the moon, calling it the mind moon or the moon of suchness. And this is a quote from D.T. Suzuki. All right. And then here's the poem, Mind Moon. Light in Frederick Church's Syria by the Sea comes out of a central source unseen. The foreground ruins are an autobiography. In Sunset in the Tropics, the mind strives to go beyond the dissolving withered tree, the wasteland in the distance, and the empty horizon where a brown river flows from the rich pigments of green earth, slow poisoning with cadmium and arsenic. And by the creation of his last scene, the Church of San Diego, color bare, he would resolve his own pale form, and behold, like Eckhart's little point, broken rafters vanishing in true moonlight. And I just learned within the hour that Napoleon himself may have been poisoned by cadmium and arsenic and such poisons in paint. So I don't know. They had the same suspicion for Frederick Church, I hear. All right, this next poem, it's not a sonnet. It's a little bit longer, and it's called L.A. Days. When I was young and living in L.A., my life felt just like a movie. Driving my beat-to-shit car down wide-open highways through Agora and the golden hills of Diamond Bar, like I was in the 50s, cruising on Azusa and drinking it up at the Brass Elephant or the Red Onion, absorbing declensions at Cal Poly, working at the rat-infested peanut company till I got kicked out because I kicked out a belligerent drunk who won $10,000 in the lottery, and for that, the manager fired me. Carving up lines at the Holiday Inn, having insane conversations with Eddie, who looked just like Joe Pesci, who was on trial for assault and was now acting as his own lawyer, saying, I'm smart. Why have an overworked, underpaid public defender fuck things up? and the weird Zoloft brothers wearing their green velvet shirts and alarm clocks around their necks, whispering in their made up language while Professor Halsey takes a century to casually crook a leg on the corner desk. Or afternoon happy hour at Don Carlos's, drinking margaritas in the garden, winking our way back to the townhouse, and diving into the electric pool, and then crawling back into our rooms where we drift high on a futon in a sunspot on the floor. Stone free and spinning with the world. Or late night drinking with Shonda and Jalal, who fight, and yet he'd say, I want what you have. And we're knocking back tequila shots and chopping up the worms, chasing dragons in the siren night, till I slip away to grab some sleep before the hammer of another workday. Lying there breathing, heart beating fast, mind on the race, helicopters overhead with lights strafing the neighborhood and punching through the windows. So I rise and behold the spine-sharp, shivering spears of morning plant life and the crazy hidden people laughter. And then I'm off to the construction site, dry mouth, no water. I must have put in 50 nails with the nail gun before I realized the futility of all of this and walked off and got a cold beer. I barely got out of there alive. And I loved it, was in love, reading Joyce again and Kafka, Aldous Huxley, Boethius, Hemingway's Old Man in the Sea, trancing out in movies like Rumblefish, Blue Velvet, After Hours, and Brazil, soundtracks and concept albums floating above it, LA Woman, Babylon Sisters, swatting at flies in the kumquat shade and the juniper hills of Mount Baldy, tripping ass with Jack and Laurie and McKenna and Pitzer Esserscapes, with vine-heavy moth-covered oaks and courtyards under floating balconies, stairways rising to swirling star skies until a cop appears with his flashlight shining in our eyes, saying, get out of here. And Jack's gone off his rocker because he got a copy of the Necronomicon. And then weird shit started happening. So he tried to throw it away, first by tossing it in the alleyway. There it is in the back of his closet when he gets up the next day. And he thinks, someone's trying to fuck with me. So he tries to burn it, but it won't burn. Tries ripping it up, but the pages won't tear. And it's freaking him out. And he's freaking me out, telling me about it. Like our lives are chapters out of Steppenwolf or Damien being read into existence through some magician's incantations. And we dip into strange cartoon scenes with giant mini-golf Dutch windmills that suddenly appear on the freeway. Big blades swinging down, swoosh, narrowly missing a swoosh as we drive right through a tiny door, laughing happy into the orange fire of the setting sun. And later on the golden beach, we swim out in the rolling breaks and on through the oblivion, neon-lit martini belly of the ocean. Sky dotted with swizzle stick kites and the moon eye on the perimeter come to peek in on the world. And they're decorating Christmas trees with beer cans for the bonfire. And Brian's cooking up a bunch of fun while Chris plays a strange new song that slides us into 3 a.m. and back to dawn, where we wind up at the trailer park with Uncle Dom crook-backed and pushing a ratty dog off the couch, a rattling gold watch on his bony wrist, tumbling, rolling back through Westwood, flowing with the wild children, resolving onto Indian Hill Boulevard, with streetlights slithering scorpion tail signs, reflections over the hood of the car, the 10 freeway loud howling, and there never is an end to it. The sound, constant flow of LA, the eye of the storm twisting its way in a slouching river rush to be born, like a hurricane or a crashing wave, or a champagne flute exploding in a fireplace on a Hollywood stage set. An engine revving, a news voice droning, couples drifting toward the dream spirit who shows her face in a rearview mirror as we drive in sync, linked by karmic DNA. Pulling up to the family garage as someone crushes out a cigarette, and someone looks just like Joan Jett, and someone's on a beer run, and someone's showing off their gun, and anything can happen when you feel just like Jesus' son. But we make it through like a perfect 3-point jump shot, out of nowhere, a prayer in the night. And so I've come back to tell you about this dream I had, about a man who goes into a theater to watch the movie of his life. And all the way through, he keeps saying, I remember that, or that never happened, or oh man, I wish I could do that again. LA days. I find myself as I read it kind of having an odd experience of almost, you know, uh, experiencing the person who wrote it. It's been a little while since I wrote it now, and almost the reverie of the man watching his own life in a movie is kind of like reading the book itself. You know, oh, who was that guy that wrote that? It's fun to look at it again. So anyway, thank you for hearing my poems, and I turn the mic over to our next reader.
Okay, that's Emily. Thank you, Doug. We're looking forward to listening to Emily.
Hello. Thank you, Doug. I also had some LA days, so that was great. I am the author of this book, Great Divide, from Unsolicited Press. But I'm actually not going to be reading from that one today. I'm going to be reading from some short pieces, because I feel like short pieces are easier for a reading than novels. So I'm going to read a piece called On the House, which was published in Volume 1 Brooklyn last year. And the only thing to know about it's a flash fiction piece, very short, but it is all one sentence. So it's a very short story, but a very long sentence. Mark was behind the counter at Java time that day, which pleased no one, because while he was a nice guy, the first thing anyone said about him, just the nicest guy, he was also a remedial person with the dopey goodness of a golden retriever. Symbolically golden, a retriever who has never suffered. An affect that permeated every facet of his work, from the quality of his soy milk foams, flaccid, to the strength of his drip coffee, burnt, so we all endured an internal clench when we saw him, though no one previously had clenched with such unmediated extravagance as Jesse on the fabled day when he discovered Brittany Kern post and also pre-coitally in bed with Danny Miller following one of Brittany's infamous pool parties to which Jesse had not been invited on account of his still delicate sub-90-day sobriety and the inevitability of drunken debauches at a Brittany party, which caused more than a few of us to question the wisdom of this particular relationship at this particular time. But love is love, and was now a moot point, as both the shimmering glass upon which romance projects its illusions and Jesse's hard-earned edge had broken before noon against the hard reality of a plastic jug of vodka left sitting on Brittany's kitchen counter, which might otherwise have been the active ingredient in hangover cure screwdrivers, but which was now, unadulterated by anything as optimistic as orange juice, nestled into the passenger seat of Jesse's car as he drove around town, taking dipsomaniac swigs at stoplights. Or so we were told by Naomi, who showed up in a state of rabid agitation as which she externalized via the purchase of 3 chocolate and cream cheese muffins, which she consumed in a virtuoso performance of stress eating while recounting the crackly cell phone conversation she'd had with an at the very least browned out Jesse, in which she had talked him into coming to meet her at Java time, since she had to make this all about her and would never waste an act of human kindness on its recipient alone when an audience could be found, though she didn't say that last part. And the rest of us had yet to come to a consensus on whether we would stick around for this shit show. There weren't any other shows at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, when all negotiations were brought to a wrap by the arrival of Jesse himself in a tire-screeching, street-crossing swerve of a parking job that we all believed would end inside the shop with several of us maimed and cursing Brittany's infidelities, though in fact Jesse pulled it off and stumbled in looking pungent and regarding us all with a belligerence that remained impersonal until Mark came bounding up, with his lolling tongue and muddy paws, an insult to Jesse's shattered interior, saying, "Whatever you want, man, it's on the house." Which was the moment we all remembered that Mark had maybe also slept with Brittany sometime that spring, though who hadn't by that point. And Jesse must have remembered it too, because we all saw a demon intelligence steal over his blunted features, a sudden animism that, as when a match is struck and transforms from object to something almost certainly alive and dancing. And some of us would later say we knew an iconic moment was in progress, though that is probably bullshit because it happened fast. Jesse's arm already in motion, already reaching out to grasp the ceramic jug that held the half and half, the liquid contents of which he launched towards Mark in a swooshing parabola that recalled at once the St. Louis Gateway Arch and the celebrated high-speed photograph Milk Drop Coronet. This second suggestion made across the length and breadth of Mark's torso as the cream landed, accompanied by the percussion of Jesse's triumphant voice calling out, "And is that on the house?" before he escaped through the back door and into a protracted rehab stay, which was for the best, and none of us were saying Mark deserved it. But we had to admit there was a strain of genius in the thing, an impressive bit of wordplay for someone so wasted to conjure up, with Mark as the human representative of the abstract idea of the house, and the dairy as a catalyst that closed the figurative in flesh and blood and milk fat and meaningful vitality, a magic trick that us denizens of the Java time immediately recognized as a metaphor for art itself, a transformation we were always trying to perform and mostly making fools of ourselves in pursuit of. As was amply pointed out by the high school kids who would drive by and heckle us as we sat outside with our lattes discussing poetry, yelling, "Oh, so intellectual," from their Dodge Neons, and who once egged us, and who once pelted us with a bunch of buns from the Burger King dumpster inside of which they'd Sharpied "Kiss Me Coffee Breath." Because the truth was, we did think we were smart, did think we were special, did think that we were bright stars streaking across the gray of our city, lighting up the post-industrial decay, creating, as Jesse had, something elegant in the midst of our failures, even if it was nothing more than a perfect turn of phrase, pulled up from the wreckage of our educations, a textbook example of metonymy. And that's that one. I'm also going to read another small piece. I'm actually going to read maybe the first third, maybe not even quite first quarter of a long short story that has just come out in the Iowa Review. So new issue of that, if anyone wants it. And this story is called The Claw. When Chloe was just a few days old and none of us were getting any sleep, Jeremy developed a technique he called the claw. Whenever Chloe started to fuss, he would wrap his palm around the whole of her chest, pressing his fingers in with a little more force than it took to make me cringe. The results were inarguable. Whenever I woke to the snuffling Jurassic noises she made before crying, I would pinch Jeremy's arm and stage whisper, "Give her the claw." Then the noises would slow and shift and register until they dissolved back into the rattly substance of newborn sleep. In the brief hours between feedings, I fell into restless and recursive dreams. Some of these were about Chloe, imagining her lost in the bedsheets or forgotten on the living room floor. But in most, she didn't exist. In most, I was 14 and working at the West Beach Boardwalk Arcade, trying endlessly to unjam a roll of paper tickets that had gotten stuck in the air hockey table while Mr. Ducey yelled at me for leaving the register unattended. I considered that perhaps this was my mind's way of processing the experience of labor. Really, though, I think it was only the claw that reminded me of the arcade, an echo of the machine that stood beside my cashier's stand and scraped its flimsy metal fingers across the toys within, leaving paths marked into their plush like the little shadows of Chloe's ribs. The genius of the claw machine came from being the only game in the arcade that took quarters. Everything else, the skee ball ramps gone bumpy from kids climbing on them, the big buck hunter with the crooked laser sight, the NBA hoops machine in mysteriously perfect working order, despite more than one 12-year-old getting inside the safety netting to do dunks on the plastic rim, required golden tickets emblazoned with the grinning face of Peppy Porpoise Pat. The machine that spit out the tokens took, at minimum, a $5 bill and didn't always give the right number of coins in return. This was the arcade's primary grift, but a lot of people didn't want to waste $5 to look stupid with a handful of dolphin tokens while they tried to chat up the pretty cashier girl. So, for them, the claw. Their favorite cashier girl was, no contest, Julie J., who was 16 and skinny and had blonde hair down to her ass. Half the staff called her Julie and me Julie B., and the other half were just being nice. When Julie J. worked the cashier's stand, there was a steady stream of boys hanging around the claw machine. On the rare occasion they managed to win one of the rainbow-colored teddy bears, they would give it to Julie J. with a red-faced flourish. She would clap her hands and coo, but at closing, I saw her put the bears back in the machine. She wore a promise ring, and everyone at school said she took it seriously. My mom got me a promise ring when I turned 14 and gave it to me in a white ring box like she was proposing. I didn't wear it, not because I didn't believe Jesus wanted me to, not because I didn't believe that Jesus wanted me to stay pure for my husband, but because promising not to fuck anyone felt a lot like promising not to accept $1 million. I didn't think it was going to come up. I didn't really understand how I was supposed to get a husband to stay pure for, though lots of people who had husbands weren't pretty. Even my mom had a husband for a while, and she wasn't pretty at all, though in old pictures she was at least skinny and had cute clothes. I was amazed looking at those pictures. I hadn't realized someone could be skinny and still look bad. Her face was really toady and mine wasn't. I looked like the husband, who was normal but was fat. When I worked, the only boy standing by the claw machine was Howie Breams. Howie Breams, with his cowlick and his Little League uniform dusty to the knees, looking like he'd stepped out of a Little Rascals movie. Howie Breams, who came to the arcade every Wednesday and Saturday night that summer and held forth to me with exhausting authority about every high school mascot in a 40-mile radius, their relative merits, their costumes, and signature moves. Cut him some slack, my mother said to me as I doubled over in the passenger seat of the Hyundai whenever we rolled past the Memorial Park baseball field. He's just flirting with you. What she couldn't grasp from the distant shores of adulthood was that the only thing worse than being flirted with by Howie Breams was not even being flirted with by Howie Breams. And Howie flirting was identical to Howie merely marking time, expressing a basic and easy-flowing sociability the way strangers in a grocery store checkout line might do. Except instead of the weather, it was high school mascots. And instead of the news, it was high school mascots. And instead of politicians, it was high school mascots. And instead of the many varied locations of community life, it was 2 feet from my cashier's counter directly in front of the claw machine. All of which is to say, I didn't expect a lot of attention from guys. So when Ben wandered in from the boardwalk one Friday afternoon and started pumping quarters into the claw machine, I made up a little story to explain it to myself. He was waiting for his girlfriend, I decided. They'd had a fight. He wanted a present to say he was sorry. He was going away to college, and she was afraid he would forget about her, but he would never forget about her because she was really beautiful. I imagined her looking a lot like Julie J, but with more of a quiet glamour. They used to drive to the beach when they'd first met to get ice cream at Ritter's and go swimming at night when you're not supposed to. They'd lost their virginity to each other on the sand down by the point. Unfortunately, he wasn't doing a great job with the claw. By the time I spoke up, I figured he'd already spent $3, and he still wasn't anywhere close to figuring out the trick, which was that you had to undershoot by 3 inches and go for a bear that was lying flat. Even then, he'd only get a silver one, and those were weird looking. They have bears at the gift shop next door, I told him. They're like $10, but they're a lot nicer than these. He smiled with one corner of his mouth curling up his cheek. Baby, he said, I'm not really here for the bears. In the decades since, I have spent a lot of time trying to discern if Ben was, in fact, hot. When I think of him now, he seems balanced on a knife's edge, every feature threatening to become too much. The eyes too girlishly pretty and the nose too beaky, the lines in his stubbly face too deep. He had the charm of someone who needed charm, and the fact that he didn't need it made it all the more charming. Agile swings from confidence to humility, the self-conscious bravado of that baby, a crumbling stairs, dropping away as he sprinted up it. He was hot, I think, but perhaps he was only so for a short while and did not know how to wear the charisma of his skin. Sometimes people have a moment. Sometimes they find good light. That's the only way to make sense of it. An attractive man should not have acted as he did. I blushed, pretended, more or less, not to have heard. What's your name? I asked, and he said it was Ben. What's yours? He asked, and I said it was Julie B. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to Lori.
Hi, thank you. Boy, you guys are amazing. So tonight I'm going to read a little bit from my memoir, travel memoir, Unsettled, and it just came out January 2024, so I'm excited about it. I'll read just a little bit from the very beginning and then some from the first chapter entitled Lost Ovaries. And so the book opens with me at the age of 48 on a badmatch.com date in my hometown of Rochester, New York. Okay. That was a year or so before my travels. Around the time my settled life in Rochester began feeling all too familiar, like the soft sweatpants I'd fish from my dresser drawer each Saturday morning and wear to the local grocers despite their pilled fabric, the hole in one knee. It was around the time an urgent restlessness began to pester me. First, during afternoon lulls in my daily work routine, then each evening as I sat on my sofa answering emails in front of the television. Something's missing. At night, I'd awaken from deep sleep an hour before dawn, sit with hot tea, ask myself what I wanted, what I was longing for. My answer at first felt vague. Wholeness, perhaps? As months passed, my uneasiness took on momentum, snowballed into a compelling force. I felt a compulsion to seek, a drive to cast about, an explorer's itch. And I began toying with the idea of leaving my job, my house, my friends and family, the place that felt like home. South Korea felt anything but familiar with its sole street vendors who sold stewed silkworm larvae, mung bean pancakes, and steamed octopus. Store signs were written in Hangul, the Korean alphabet, in stacked letters that looked to me like tiny boxes and ladders, square-shaped S's and upside-down T's. Tanks of live flounder, eel, and horseshoe crab lined sidewalks in front of restaurants and grocery stores. Green and yellow lovebirds sang from bamboo cages hung in tea house windows. The air in congested subway cars smelled of garlic, red chili paste, and fermented cabbage. I navigated the crowded sidewalks and metro lines, the city river paths and jogging trails. Oftentimes, I felt disoriented and out of place, yet my skin tingled with a safari hat sense of adventure. 3 months after arriving in South Korea, I decided my vagina needed to be looked at by a professional for a change, and I made an appointment to part my knees for Dr. Chung. I'd never been pap smeared in the Eastern Hemisphere, yet approached the clinic reception desk with a swagger of confidence. After all, how different could it be? Dr. Chung's clinic sat on the top floor of a squat 3-story building bookended by high-rises, a chipped incisor in a row of healthy teeth. The receptionist, a porcelain-skinned young woman with a perfect facial symmetry, asked what I wanted done. I hesitated, first because the question threw me, but also because the receptionist looked so familiar. Hadn't I seen her somewhere before? Then realized I'd seen that same face on my male English composition student, Bumsuk. In South Korea, plastic surgery seemed stigma-free and commonplace. About half my students at Wangja University received cosmetic surgery promissory notes for high school graduation gifts. Congratulations, graduate, anything is possible. Eyelid doubling, face fat thinning, jawbone reduction. During an English conversation activity one day, my classroom full of bright, hard-working college freshmen confessed past or planned plastic surgeries. What could you possibly want to change? I'd ask, dumbfounded. Both male and female students rattled off a list of perceived shortcomings. 2 round faces, slightly bumped noses, slit eyes. There was an authentic sweetness about many of my students, an endearing naivete. Have a nice weekend, Lori teacher, they'd say on Friday afternoons, holding their hands in front of their chests, fingers curved and thumbs touching, hand hearts. Thank you. Wonderful weekend to you too, I'd smile and then add, don't drink too much. My heart would softly break over their misunderstanding that they needed to be something better when they were perfect as is. How could they not realize that the faces with which they were born, the way their features matured, blossomed, crinkled or dimpled, puckered or plumped, were uniquely expressive, golden, ideal? Then I'd catch my own reflection in the sunlit classroom window pane, my nose that looked roughly sculpted from Play-Doh, the skin on my neck appearing tired and creased, my Willie Nelson ears. Why am I feeling sorry for them? They're so damned pretty. These Korean beauties with perfectly pouty lips on heart-shaped faces, their delicate trimmed straight noses and pulled round Kewpie eyes, their Barbie doll chins and tiny moonshell ears. And those were the guys. Dr. Chung's receptionist wore a powder pink jumper and nameplate with Jihi in raised letters. Jihi blinked at me. You want gynecology or cosmetic? Apparently, Dr. Chung specialized in OBGYN and cosmetic surgery. She worked both ends. It was a business plan with foresight. Deliver a steady stream of homely babies, and 18 years later, chisel them adorable. Gynecology, I said. Jihi placed a sheet of paper on the desk counter. Using the fingertips of both hands like a seamstress guiding a silk hem under a sewing needle, she slid the paper in front of me. Please check box. Jihi tapped her fingernail, painted Hawaiian punch pink. She touched the glittery velvet bow on her black headband. She seemed half human, half Minnie Mouse. Please check, she repeated. I held the pen in my veiny hand. Jihi seemed born for the girly things that left me bewildered, like knowing which hairstyle flattered her face shape and what color blouse brought out her eyes. I, on the other hand, begrudged carrying a purse, resented having to shave my knees. Compared with Jihi, my X chromosome was half-baked. I read the long menu of gynecological options, prices included. The list of procedures started out simple enough. Pap test, 40,000 Korean won, about $40. Prenatal screening, 50,000 won. Mammography, 70,000 won. They grew increasingly ominous. Ovarian cancer marker, for example, viral load test HIV. Some procedures raised questions. Perineal reconstruction, vaginal wet mount, recto seal. Who would elect to have their recto sealed? I checked the box in front of pap test. Should I have also checked mammography, blood tests? Dr. Chung's nurse ushered me down a stucco corridor and into a room stuffed with dated office furniture. On a black smudged desktop stood a dusty rubberized model of a cervix and fallopian tubes. Put on these, the nurse said cheerfully, handing me a light stack of paper examination wear, a wide pleated skirt and slippers in sanitation worker blue. Thank you. I checked her nameplate. Seyon. I stepped behind the white curtain privacy screen located in the corner of the exam room and changed into my paper clothes. No height and weight check, no blood pressure measure, no peeing in a Dixie cup. Strip from the waist down and don the disposable slippers. It's just the vagina, ma'am. Okay, Sekyun said. Come. She led me to the examination table, which was more like a leather lazy boy with stirrups. The examination recliner was lined with heavy white paper that crackled when I swung my legs up onto the thigh stirrups. I tucked the skirt pleats between my legs and waited for Dr. Chung. My first gynecological exam in Seoul brought with it a few practical concerns. Would the doctor's English be proficient enough to explain any medical findings or issues? Would my Korean health insurance cover most of the fees? Where would I get my prescriptions filled? Did my body parts look like theirs? And that's where I'll end. Rosalia, you're muted. Oh,
You're muted again.
Rosalia, you're muted. Oh, there you
Is
go.
that better?
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you so much for all your readings. All of you did such wonderful jobs and definitely inspiring readings. So let's talk about the work and the process. Who would, first of all, I'd like to know where that title came from, The Gold Tooth and the Smile of God. It seems kind of cheeky, the crooked smile of God.
It seems what to you again?
Cheeky.
Peaky.
Cheeky.
Cheeky.
Cheeky. Like, to assume that God has a crooked smile and a gold tooth.
I stole it. I stole the title from God. It's from a movie I saw called Searching for the Wrong-Eyed Jesus.
Oh,
Anybody ever heard of that one? Searching for the Wrong-Eyed Jesus. And there's a musician. It's a documentary sort of by a musician named Jim White. And I can't even barely remember it now, but it was very strange that he encounters these people. He's mostly down south. But anyway, and he says, and I quote him, he says, as I traveled all around the world, I became more and more dissatisfied with my search for God. I couldn't find God wherever I went, couldn't find any meaning. And I realized that I wasn't looking for what everybody else was. I was looking for the gold tooth in God's crooked smile. And it hovered in my brain for a number of years, and then as I was putting this together, it was catchy. It does have a cheeky feel to it. It's memorable, and it also sort of put a nice ball in the pin of the themes of the book. It's all kind of you said it at the beginning. I think you quoted one of the blurbs that they're poems of the street, which
yeah.
I don't know. To me, I guess that's true. That to a certain degree, that's true. It's. I have other ideas about poems of the street. I think it has some domestic stuff too, but yeah, that's where I got the title.
Well, the street might be some domestic stuff, but one of the things I noticed about all of your work, all three of you, is that your characters are very, really and unique and very well developed. So, can each of you speak to, the character development? Lori with the students, so beautifully drawn, and Emily with the claw. It seems so ingenious, and I really love that story. And Doug with the characters that were in your, they sort of seem a little rough and ready. So, can you talk about how you develop the characters? Are they based off people you've seen or known, or are they completely organic to the story? So, who would like to start?
I'll give it a go. I mean, I sort of have the easier answer because since it's memoir, they're real, but that can actually create some challenges because even though I'm writing my truthful story about what happened to me, and I can I'm interacting or I interacted in real life with my students, and there's also a chapter that a couple of chapters actually that involve my dad. It's such a sort of strange phenomenon with writing memoir or personal essay in the sense that even though I'm writing about me, I'm writing about me as a character and my dad as a character. And in fact, I dedicated the book to my dad, and he was kind of really blown away by that, and really was happy about that. And I told him, well, thank you so much for being such a good sport about being a character in my book, because that can be sort of awkward. But it's, I remember so vividly my students and the sights and sounds. And I think that's part of what happens oftentimes when you travel. You can be sort of more awake everywhere you are because everything's so new and different.
So did the characters, since they were real, a lot of times people say that writers will say that they will base characters on some particular person, but that person will never recognize themselves. So did your father recognize himself in the book, or was it because it was so blatantly identified as him? Did he ever say things like, "I didn't think I was really like that"?
No, he's been so supportive. He is certainly recognizable. And my dad's one of a kind. And but yeah, he was a very, very good sport about it. And if he had any qualms about certain parts, he only expressed what was positive to me. But I think he was genuinely happy. Thankfully.
Emily, so Emily, can you talk about the characters in The Claw, and also that very amazing long sentence in a short story, where all the characters kind of like appear in a phrase? Um, you were able to develop them in such a, like, with a twist of a phrase almost. So do you want to talk about how you did that? Or
Totally. Yeah, so that story is pretty directly based on a real experience, but so it's based on a coffee shop that I worked at when I was a teenager. That was sort of a central place in my life, and sort of in sort of the community of, like, basically it was kind of a relatively small town, and anyone who wanted to be an artist or read or cared about anything like that, like, would end up at this one spot. So in trying to talk about it, there was this, like, big messy community where everyone knew each other and everyone was in each other's business, and because it was all these artists and writers, like, it was very garrulous, and sort of there was this rank-and-tearing spirit. So when I sort of sat down and tried to write about that place, it did start coming out as this collective voice. So yeah, there are individual characters for sure, and they're individual people who inspired those people, but, like, it's more about finding the character, and the voice of that place was maybe more my goal with that particular piece, was just trying to make that place itself a character, and the community around it a character. The Claw is different. That one is not based in any particular place or time that's biographical at all. I think the characters really just came out of, like, sort of a pastiche of adolescence, just trying to find that, like, I don't know, squeamish heart of being a teenager. And I think something that was important to me in writing that character of Julie B is that she not be exceptional. I wanted her to be funny and I wanted her to be bright, but I didn't want her to be some sort of, like, overwhelmingly smart voice narrating that experience. I wanted her to be kind of to feel like a real teenager with kind of all the flaws and biases and goofiness of a kid. So that was kind of my main guiding star with writing her.
The thing that you were able to do with that story so well, and others could talk about this technique too, is start in the present, but then switch the present to the past. Because by the time that Julie B is telling the story, she's already has a child with who has a father. So she's looking, it's that one thing where, the child's father does the hand with the claw that gets the baby to sleep. And so the claw actually means two different things. So, like, how did you do that? Did you envision, or did it just come about organically, where Julie B sees that and then is automatically transported back into adolescence, so that the claw has a double meaning, at least in the part that you read.
Yeah, that came about more or less organically. I think in early drafts there was sort of more of that frame story. In the present tense, it went on not a huge amount more, but a few more paragraphs, another scene or two, and sort of like having it read by friends and workshops. The advice was kind of just like cut it back and cut it back and cut it back until it ended up being this like very thin frame. And we do return to that at the end of the story, but again, very, very briefly. So it really is this thin frame around the real story, which is the past tense, which, it has to do with the idea that this formative experience is sort of still very present and still very alive for her, even as a much older person who's, in many ways moved past that time and that experience. It's still right there under the surface, and it only takes this one little moment, this one little moment of recognition, this one connection to sort of pull her back fully into the past. And the voice very quickly becomes more adolescent almost immediately. As soon as she's back in the story, she's sort of back in that teenage self.
Yeah, those details are really incredible. I think a lot of teenagers will resonate with the mother who was not attractive, and they wonder how their mother even had boyfriends and how they came about, and stuff like that. And Doug, your characters are so viscerally real. The guy with the necromancy book, and so are they based on living people that you've kind of like, used as an offspring, or is it all these characters totally, um, from your imagination?
Yeah, that's. I like the question. How much is the character? I mean, the people I'm describing in there are people I mean, they start off as people I know. Jack, the one you mentioned, apparently I never saw him, but he performed. But he supposedly he was in a Doors cover band and did a good Jim Morrison, I guess. But he told me that story there. That was true. But Emily, I was thinking about the Claw. Rosalia the Claw is Emily's Proustian Madeline, right? Isn't that?
I just here and hadn't made that connection, but I was reading Proust when I wrote that story. So.
Oh, no kidding. It seeped in.
So.
Perfect. Yeah, but I'm thinking, Lori, you wrote a memoir, straightforward memoir, right? You're right. So you're saying it's true, right? And Emily's got fiction. I'm writing poetry, but I think it's the same thing, right? I was saying, because the minute you asked that question, Rosalie, I thought of this essay I read by Patricia Hampel. Anybody ever read her essay about memory and imagination? Lori, you know that one?
Oh gosh, not the extra. I mean, I'm familiar with Patricia Hampel, but I can't remember the essay. Yeah.
And she writes about that very subject, about how you go to try to write memoir, but once language gets involved in the page and everything, your imagination, and you can't trust your memory anyway. And I was just talking to my partner the other day about this. She's like, well, if you write it and it's exactly how it happened, is it still art? Or you just copying reality? I'm like, no, it's drama. The minute it gets into your brain and into your pen and on the page, it's drama, however you carved it out and put it there.
And you can use whichever literary techniques in writing it and crafting it, which is a lot of the fun. And memory is fluid. And so I think the challenge is to try to be a reliable narrator is kind of just what you're hoping to do. But which is a little strange, especially with my quirky perspective. So it's all fun.
But do you find yourself in writing memoir? Because I know I've got some memoir of my own I've been working on too. And I like the idea of the facts. I want to capture them. But I also, and this was what I forgot to mention about Patricia Hampel's essay. She says, go. if the imagination kicks in, let it, because you can't be sure anyway. And so let go of your attachment to the truth. I don't know, or but I want to create that little capsule too.
I think
I
there's
think that's
been
wise
a lot of
advice
debate.
to let go. I'm sorry.
There's throughout the years with creative nonfiction, that's been this ongoing debate.
Yeah.
Well,
And
I
then people
think
just
it's
call it
wise to
autofiction.
let it go. You know, I once held a reading. We used to have traveling literary parties in Baltimore, and one person called and asked to be able to read it. He was not a writer and did not know anything about craft. And when he showed me his piece before the reading, I said, nothing happens in the story. You know, it's flat. It's flat. And he was very upset with me. And he said, "Well, that's not the way it happened. I wrote it the way it really happened." And I said, "Well, there's no drama in it." And he disliked my advice to add drama to it. And he read it the way it was, and it bombed. So I think people don't understand that even if something is based in fact and based in truth, there still has to be the elements of storytelling, which is tension, good characterization, conflict. There has to be conflict. I mean, even in a memoir, there's conflict. The conflict of, going to a doctor and wondering, um, what kind of an exam am I really going to get into, and will it be covered? I mean, that's, and the language barrier, I would think, offers another element of misunderstanding and comedy, actually.
Sure. And the act of searching, and will I find what I'm searching for? And oh yeah, and then there's all sorts of conflict with dating at midlife. So it's
Oh yeah, we didn't get much of that part.
Maybe you could read that part next, Laurie.
another time.
Okay. I have a
So,
question
what
for Emily.
advice? We have a couple minutes left. Well, we have more. We have like 10 minutes left. So, I want to know, what advice do you want to give to aspiring writers about the writing process, the discipline, and the work, showing up for the work. So, Emily, do you want to start, since you are, a fiction editor, a prose editor at Naomi Press, and editor of Rivet Journal? What do you, if you could say anything to aspiring or new writers, what would that be?
That's such a big question. I won't even couch this as like general advice to anyone starting out, because I think, there's so many things that you could say. But I think it's just about following what's exciting to you, following what is, whatever the thing in the story is that you're drawn to, dive into it full scale. Just push it further. I think a lot of times when people are starting off writing, they get a lot of advice that's about like rules, about like, oh, this is what a story has to have, this is how a story has to be. And I think that's really counterproductive. And I can understand why new writers want it, because it's hard to figure out how to write. And there's often, you want rules, you want, a frame that you can hang everything on. But ultimately, I don't think that's what it's about. I think that's a misdirection, because I think it can be, there's no rules, and trying to follow rules and trying to apply rules just kind of deadens the work. So I think you got to just kind of be bold and push into it and push it further. And whatever the thing is that's exciting to you or that's funny to you, just go in full speed and, clean it up later.
Laurie, do you have any advice?
Well, the first thing is to, read, which I know we hear that a lot, but, that's where you see what's possible. And it's so humbling to look at, this really amazing work out there. And I remember when I was I went to a low residency MFA program later in life. I graduated in 2019, and I did that while I was teaching. And I remember there was this point we were reading, and I can't even remember which essay or which work we were reading, but it was, it was just so beautiful. But there's so many beautiful, beautiful writers out there. And we were discussing it, and someone said, we're screwed, because if we need to write like that, and I think it's good. I think that's a healthy perspective, to be humbled by this really great work out there, and to read and see what's possible, but then to also trust that you'll find your own voice, you'll find your own style and your, unique path there.
Great advice. And Doug, what can you add to that?
God, now I don't know. You guys said the best. Yeah, just boldly go, like Emily said. Just jump in, have fun. And Lori, yeah, the first thing I thought too, just read. The reading will teach you what you need to know. I think, most people who want to write, they don't need advice, but I think, what would I have wanted to hear? I probably wouldn't have wanted anyone to even know I was curious about it. But if I had been, I think, just start pointing me at good writers. Just keep seeking good writers. Use your crap detector. Read the first paragraph. Just keep going. Yeah. And I don't think it's something that I would want to tell. I don't know if it's advice, but I think that it's kind of a neat part of the art, is that it's so movable, right? Like you can write anywhere. All you need is a pen, a piece of paper, and that's the beauty of it. So just be prepared. Keep some paper in your back pocket. Keep a pen. Always whatever. And just wait. Don't wait. Keep working. Oh yeah, that's it. Every day do a little bit. Doesn't matter how much.
I think it's important.
A little bit.
Every day
A
do a
rule.
little
But
bit.
that sounds like a
really
rule.
important.
Don't have a rule.
Do you all keep journals?
Yeah, tons.
I don't keep a journal, but I'm constantly writing. I have little notebooks all over, and I'm constantly jotting things down, but I'm not an every evening journal writer, but I admire people who do that.
Emily?
I'm not. I've never been a journaler. And actually recently I had an experience that made me think that I should, that I found a bunch of old notebooks from when I was 17 and working at that coffee shop. And apparently I was writing my memoir at the time. It was a journal, but I was calling it a memoir. And in reading through this, I realized that all the things I was writing about were things that I remembered really, really vividly, when there was a lot of other stuff happening at that same time that I did not remember as vividly. And I realized I had played a trick on myself, that I had written about these things, and by writing about them and by journaling about them, had made myself remember them with a kind of clarity that I don't remember anything else that I did not write about from that time. And I told my friend this, who is a writer, and she's like, you gotta start journaling. I was like, oh, I do. So even though I am not a journaler,
You gotta give yourself homework.
Yeah.
I once heard a description of writing is having homework every day, but having no one to check it. We have to do our homework every day, our reading and writing.
But it doesn't feel like work.
Say that again.
It doesn't feel like work, though. I mean, it does. It feels like work. What? Oh, I can't remember the poet. Well, it said, I never worked hard except on a poem. That's true. That's true. But it's work that doesn't feel like work, It's not like Monday going on the bus.
Well, it's a passion. I think all of us have to have a passion for expression, not only expressing ourselves, but for saying something about the human condition. Because even though the stories are personal in many ways, it still says something about the human condition one way or another, whether it's the musician and or the characters in your street observations, or Emily's adolescent angst, claw, or even the coffee shop thing, and Laurie. It's sort of like a coming of age and middle age, finding your identity and self. everyone finds that place at a different time. So, and writing helps us um, have more clarity about those things. So, all right, we could say goodnight now. Before we say goodnight, I want to let everyone know that our next readings will be March 6th at 8:30, and I hope everyone has enjoyed this. Thank you for joining us this evening. We didn't see any questions from the audience this evening, but next time I should remember that they could put them in the chat, and we'll see them. So I want to say goodnight, everyone, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Good to be with all of you.
Great to be with you.